This is a story about decisive decision-making on my part that cost a lot of money. It turned out to be precisely the wrong decision. And I'm a writer, a financial writer, and a consultant. I used to write for the press. Now, for many years, I write for corporations, a variety of capacities. And so across my lengthy tenure of being in business, I've written quite a few business plans. And whenever I wrote a business plan, I was generally offered a small sliver of equity. And if I wasn't offered a small sliver of equity, I usually asked for a small sliver of equity. And the one time that I didn't ask for this equity would have been worth $22 million when my client, Energy Brands, developer, manufacturer, and distributor of the now ubiquitous Smart Water, sold themselves to Coca-Cola for $4.3 billion. And so if this story has a name, it's called Smart Water before it got smart, because that's when I caught up with them. And I had my reasons why I decided not to ask for equity. The first reason was equity's great. It's probably what everyone in the room here is for. But you can't pay bills with it. And at that time, it was 20-some years ago, I had a lot of bills. The second reason that I decided not to ask for equity was probably because how our first working meeting went. So rather than meeting them in their offices, which were in Queens, on Whitestone, near LaGuardia Airport, they asked me to meet them at an attorney's office in Stamford, Connecticut. So it turns out that the attorney represented my client's largest supplier of water. And my client was $58,000 behind in their payables. So having the meeting in the attorney's office had an unmistakable message to it, that my client had to catch things up, and they had to do it quickly. Now, the guy who hired me, his name was Bill, he understood all this. So he went to the meeting with a check for $35,000, and then he trotted me out as the professional who was going to write the plan that would enable the company to raise capital and be a better, larger, more reliable customer. So I didn't have to say anything, or I didn't have to say much. And I didn't. I just had to be there so that Bill could set his table. But the meeting led me to a realization, which was that if they were going to withhold $23,000 from their largest supplier, from the supplier for whom, without them providing water, my client, they wouldn't have even had a product. So if $23,000 was material, then my fee, which was $15,000, was also material. And my sense of it is that if I asked Bill if he would convert my fee into, say, 25 basis points or 50 basis points, that he would have gone for it. In truth, it wasn't Bill's company. Bill had a metals trading business. He was a real estate developer. He was also a boxer in a prior lifetime, a quality which was infused in every bit of his personality, though he was lovable. So it wasn't his business. It was his son's business, Darius. And Darius had led the company through a series of interesting pivots, developments, but he hadn't been able to deliver profits or wide distribution. So coming out of that meeting, I guess I made my third decision as to why I didn't want equity. And the decision was, this was a case, oh no, it's the second reason. This is a case of Dad coming to the rescue, and here was a company that was probably not really going to make it, and an equity stake wouldn't be worth much. Now the third and final reason, and I think this is the disastrous decision, was we were talking about bottled water. Now, this was in the mid-90s, so bottled water is everywhere today. But in the mid-90s, it wasn't anywhere. So the water market was flat, no pun intended, and 95% of the market was either in the 5-gallon containers that go to offices and factories, or the 1-gallon jugs that were sold in supermarkets. And any growth that was in that market was simply cannibalizing the other section of the market. Water's share of stomach, and these are the kind of things that I had to get into writing the business plan, meaning the percent of liquids that consumers consumed every year. Water's share of that was flat. So the only bright spot in the story is that water that was sold in so-called convenience packaging, that was the name of it, it didn't exist before, was red hot. And that had to be the story of the business plan, that not only could they capitalize on this trend, but that they could enlarge the category, that they would have people who people who would drink water in places and in quantities that they hadn't ever done it before. So I wrote the plan, delivered it, made the changes that they asked for, and then I was done. And that was unusual because most times when I wrote a plan, there was work to do in helping the entrepreneur craft their pitch and deliver it to investors. So when I heard about the deal, that they had sold themselves for $4.3 billion, I stopped, I exhaled, I calculated the value of my hypothetical equity stake, shook my head, and moved on.